A serving hatch was a small window cut through the wall between your kitchen and dining room. The opening sat at about waist height, usually with a shelf or ledge. When dinner was ready, you'd slide plates through instead of walking around through doorways. This saved steps every meal, which added up when serving multiple courses or feeding a family. The kitchen door could stay shut, keeping cooking smells and mess out of sight while guests sat at the table. Some versions had shutters you could close afterwards, keeping the dining room separate and tidy. These became popular in post-war homes when wives took over all the cooking and wanted to stay part of conversations while working. This one was brilliant in its simplicity. You had a wooden rack suspended from the ceiling on ropes running through pulleys, usually mounted in the kitchen. When you needed to hang washing, you'd lower the rack down to chest height, drape your wet clothes over the wooden slats, then hoist it back up. The clever bit was the placement. Kitchens stayed warm from cooking, and since heat naturally rises, your laundry sat right where the warmest air collected. It was completely free-drying using waste heat you were already producing. The rack stayed overhead and out of the way until you needed it, which saved precious floor space. The airing cupboard was a storage space built around the hot water cylinder, usually upstairs near the bathroom. The tank radiated warmth as it kept water hot, and that heat got trapped inside. Most had slatted shelves so warm air could circulate upward. You'd hang damp towels or clothes, and they'd dry gently over several hours. Towels came out warm to the touch, and linens never developed musty smells. Modern combi boilers don't need tanks, so newer homes mostly lack this. Before refrigerators were common, most families received daily milk deliveries from the late 1700s through the 1950s. The milk cupboard was a small insulated box built into your exterior wall with doors on both sides. The milkman would open the outside door early in the morning, place your glass bottles inside and close it. You'd open the inside door later and grab your milk without going outside or getting dressed. The insulation kept everything reasonably cool until collection. Some people used them for butter, newspapers or medications as well. It solved two problems at once. The milk stayed cool and the milkman never had to knock or disturb the household. A vestibule was a tiny room built right inside your front door, creating what builders call an airlock effect. You had two doors separated by 3 or 4 feet, the exterior door opening into this small chamber, then a second interior door leading into the house. When someone entered, they'd step through the outside door, close it, then open the inner door. The two doors were never opened simultaneously, so cold air never rushed straight from outdoors into your living room. The vestibule absorbed the temperature shock instead. Victorian homes commonly featured these spaces, often with tile floors and coat hooks, but the real genius was purely functional. It kept homes warmer without burning extra fuel. Before electric refrigeration became widespread in the 1930s, people kept perishable food cool on thick marble or slate slabs in their larders. These slabs were about 2 to 3 inches thick and wedged directly into the stone walls of the pantry. The stone's thermal mass meant it absorbed heat slowly and retained the cold naturally. You'd place butter, meat, cheese, or fish directly onto the slab, sometimes covering it with damp muslin or wet rushes for extra cooling. The larder was positioned on the shady side of the house with mesh-covered windows to keep flies out while air circulated. This simple system kept perishables fresh for days or even weeks. A back boiler was a heating system behind your living room fireplace, popular from the 1960s through the 80s. You had your gas or coal fire burning in the hearth, and tucked behind it was a metal heat exchanger absorbing that heat. Cold water came in at the bottom, got heated by the fire, then circulated through pipes to radiators and a hot water cylinder. You were getting hot water essentially for free since the fire was running anyway. The catch was that loads of heat went straight up the chimney instead of into the water. This made them inefficient. They were banned in 2005 because of safety and emissions concerns. Picture rail was a strip of wooden molding fixed high on the wall, usually level with the top of door frames. The top had a rounded profile that hooks could sit on, and from those hooks you hung chains or wires down to your picture frames. This system existed because plaster walls were fragile and expensive to repair. Hammering nails into plaster could crack it or cause chunks to crumble right off the backing. With picture rail, you never touched the wall itself. You could move pictures around whenever you wanted without patching holes or repainting. It spread the load across multiple studs, so it could handle surprisingly heavy frames too. In homes built before the 1970s, you'd often find beautiful parquet flooring laid throughout, then immediately covered with wall-to-wall carpet. This wasn't madness. Carpet provided warmth in winter and dampened sound between floors, which mattered in multi-story homes. The parquet underneath remained intact, waiting. When taste shifted decades later or the carpet wore through, homeowners could rip it up and reveal the hardwood beneath. Compare that to homes with cheap plywood subfloors under the carpet. Those needed complete replacement when fashion changed. The parquet approach gave you options. It might need refinishing after years under carpet, but the bones were sound and attractive. Coal cellar chutes were basically a hole in your house that led straight to where you stored your fuel. Most Victorian homes had one built into the foundation wall or pavement, usually just a heavy metal door about 12 to 14 inches across. When the coal delivery came round, the driver would flip open the hatch and tip his sack straight down into the cellar below. This saved you from dragging filthy coal through your hallways and carpets, which was a proper advantage. The chute itself was just an angled tunnel, nothing fancy, but it worked. Your coal room sat at the bottom ready to catch everything. The whole system kept your house clean while making deliveries dead simple. Dado rails were horizontal strips of wood running around a room about a meter off the floor, dividing the wall into thirds. The name comes from classical architecture, where the dado was the lower part of a wall, and the rail marked where that ended. Their job was straightforward: stop chair backs from scraping and damaging plaster when people pushed furniture against walls. In Georgian and Victorian dining rooms especially, chairs were left around the edges when not in use. Without protection, you'd end up with scuffed and cracked plaster everywhere. The rail took the damage instead. You could make them from timber, plaster, or painted wood, saving you constantly patching and redecorating damaged walls. This storage solution relied on simple physics to keep food cool without electricity. You would find it built into a north-facing exterior wall to avoid direct sunlight. The setup had two vents, one near the top and another at the bottom, both covered in wire mesh to keep insects out. Convection did all the work. Warm air escaped through the upper vent, whilst cooler air got drawn in from below. Inside you had slatted wooden shelves that allowed air to circulate around stored items: root vegetables, onions, fruits, even milk bottles wrapped in damp cloth stayed fresh in temperatures between 50 and 70 degrees. Popular from the 1890s through the 1930s. Victorian homes had ceilings that averaged 13 feet high, which is much taller than the 8-foot standard you get in modern houses. The reason was straightforward: hot air rises. In summer, when there was no air conditioning, this extra height meant the heat would collect up near the ceiling, whilst the lower part of the room stayed noticeably cooler. It worked as a passive system requiring absolutely no energy. The tall ceilings also solved another problem from that era: smoke. Whether it was tobacco smoke or smoke from candles and gas lamps, there was simply more smoke indoors back then. With the ceiling 13 feet up, the smoke would rise and hang overhead instead of sitting at face level where people actually lived and breathed. Double-hung sash windows have two panels that both slide vertically within the frame. You can open either the top sash, the bottom sash, or both at once. The clever bit is how they use natural air movement. Hot air rises, so opening the top sash lets warm air escape through the upper part of the window. At the same time, opening the bottom sash brings cooler air in from outside. This creates a convection current that moves air through the room without needing any fans or mechanical cooling. The design has been around in British homes for centuries because it simply works. The tiled hearth extended from the fireplace, opening into the room, typically 16 inches forward and 8 inches to each side. These tiles were made from heat-resistant materials like slate, granite, or ceramic. They caught any sparks or embers that popped out before they could reach the wooden floor. They also absorbed heat from the flames and radiated it back into the room for hours afterward. Once installed properly, a tiled hearth required no maintenance whatsoever and would last indefinitely. The tiles might wear smooth from foot traffic over decades, but they would never crack, warp, or need replacing like modern surrounds eventually do. The scullery was basically a back room off the kitchen where all the messy work happened. Washing dishes, peeling vegetables, scrubbing pots, dealing with raw meat, all that stuff that made a proper mess got done in here. Large Victorian homes especially needed these because hosting dinners meant mountains of dishes. The scullery kept that chaos separate, so the main kitchen stayed clean and presentable. It usually had big sinks, work tables, and storage for cleaning supplies. The scullery maid, lowest ranking servant, spent her days doing the dirtiest work. This division meant the cook could focus on cooking without constantly cleaning up. The Belfast sink came out of Northern Ireland in the 1700s, originally designed for Belfast's linen industry. It's carved from thick fireclay fired at high temperatures into a white ceramic basin with a front apron sticking out past your worktop. The defining feature is the overflow weir, a small slot near the top that lets air into the drain when the sink is full. These sinks typically run 2 feet wide with a bowl deep enough to submerge large pots or laundry. The fireclay resists scratches and stains remarkably well. Most modern shallow sinks crack within decades. You'll find Belfast sinks still working perfectly in houses over a century old. The plate rack was a simple wooden fixture built into the wall above the sink. You washed a plate, gave it a quick shake, and slotted it vertically between wooden dowels or slats. The water ran straight down into the sink below, whilst air circulated freely around both sides of the dish. Within an hour or two, everything dried completely on its own. No wiping needed, no water spots forming, no tea towels to wash. The plates just sat there drying themselves through gravity and air, ready to be grabbed for the next meal. Some designs held 8 plates, others held dozens, depending on the size of the household. At night, when temperatures dropped, the walls slowly released that stored heat back into rooms. This kept indoor temperatures relatively stable without furnaces or air conditioning. The thick walls also blocked outside noise effectively, so houses felt quieter and insulated from the street. A mangle drawer was exactly what it sounds like, a purpose-built bit of storage for your mangle and laundry equipment. These were typically built into kitchen dressers or utility cabinets from the late 1800s onwards. The drawer was usually reinforced because mangles were heavy beasts, all cast iron and wooden rollers. You'd slide the mangle in when you were done with washing day, which was usually Monday. Then you could tuck your iron and maybe some starch in there as well. It kept everything in one spot rather than having the mangle sitting out taking up half your kitchen. The better versions had dividers inside to keep the different bits and pieces separated. The copper boiler in the scullery churned out enormous steam on wash day when clothes were boiled in gallons of water over a coal fire. All that steam had to go somewhere. If it just rose into the room, it would condense on walls and ceilings, causing damp rot and peeling paint. The copper hood was a metal canopy positioned above the boiler with a flue pipe venting the steam outside. This kept moisture out of the house and made the work less unbearable since you weren't standing in thick hot steam for hours. Most were made of galvanized iron or occasionally copper. They often shared their flue with the scullery range. Victorian hallways got tiled floors because they made practical sense. These entrance halls dealt with muddy boots, wet umbrellas, and heavy foot traffic every day. Carpet got ruined in months. The tiles were either small geometric shapes that locked together or encaustic tiles with patterns stamped into wet clay and filled with contrasting coloured clay before firing. Both types were fired at over 1200 degrees, making them incredibly hard and waterproof. When the floor got dirty, you just mopped it, no scrubbing or staining. The same tiles laid in 1870 are still in houses today, looking decent after 150 years. Boot scrapers became common in the 1700s when walking the streets turned fashionable rather than just for the poor trudging through muck. These cast iron fixtures sat right by your front door, usually a horizontal bar set into the wall or mounted on the steps. You'd drag your boot sole across it, then use the vertical bits for the sides and angle your heel against a curve to get the worst off. Streets back then weren't paved, they were mud baths or worse if you want honesty. The French called them décrottoirs, which literally means removing shit, so that tells you what people dealt with. This simple scraper kept all that filth outside instead of tracking it through your house. This one was brilliantly simple. You had a large tank up in your loft or attic, usually galvanized steel or later black plastic, holding 50 to 100 gallons of cold water. Mains water filled it through a ball valve, and from that height, gravity did the work. The vertical drop between the tank and your taps created the pressure, no pumps needed. The higher the tank sat, the better your pressure, which is why you'd find them right under the roof. The system was completely silent, used zero electricity, and kept working through power cuts. Maintenance was minimal because there were hardly any moving parts, just the ball valve and pipes running down through the house. The coal fireplace damper was a metal plate sitting inside your chimney flue, just above where the fire burned. You adjusted it with a lever or handle, opening it to let smoke escape and closing it partially to slow the burn. With coal, the amount of air matters more than the amount of fuel because you'd fill the firebox completely and let it burn for 12 hours. The damper controlled exactly how fast that coal burned by restricting or increasing airflow. When the fire wasn't going, you closed it completely to stop heat escaping up the chimney, which saved money by not warming the outside air. Basic but effective, it cut coal costs noticeably if you used it properly.